Met a guy named Gary Fisher. We were both on bikes, and he was like me, a hippie bike rider, and there weren't that many bike riders in Marin County then. And we eventually became roommates, and we had a house that was all about bikes, but we both had racing bikes, and at one point we rounded up, Gary had a bunch of old one-speed bikes, and we just assembled a couple of them to use for discount bikes, because hey, an Italian race bike is not very suited for going to the grocery store. So eventually we wound up taking our town bikes out on a dirt road, and it turned out to be quite a bit of fun, and we started making a practice of that. And one thing led to another, but in 1974 we saw some guys from Cupertino who were doing a very similar thing, and they had put gears on their old Schwinn cruisers, and we saw how they'd done it, and within, I don't know, about 4 or 5 months, Gary Fisher followed suit, and I was right after him because I was watching him do it. He lived in my house. We lived together, whatever. And within about a year or so, maybe 12 or 15 of us had made this conversion to multiple gears on a heavy tired bike. And the purpose was initially just ride around, you know. We'd go out, picnic, party, hang out in the woods, and ride home. But as it turned out, we found that every ride home became a competitive event. And it wasn't really the design. It's just that when you start at the top of the hill with a bunch of young men, things happen. And eventually there was a lot of smack talking about who could ride and who couldn't. And in the fall of 1976, we thought we'd settle this whole thing forever. We'll have a race, we'll find out who's fastest, and then you'll all shut up. Well, I found out something about competition, and that is it never ends. And that is, whoever won, everyone wants a shot at it. And without even thinking about it, this race thing that was really going to be a one-time thing turned into a series. And I went out and I purchased a couple of digital timers so that we could, you know, have accurate results. And by dint of the fact that I purchased the timers, I became the de facto promoter, and so the race became more and more my race, and I eventually promoted it very heavily, but that was a couple of years into the deal. However, the thing about our race, and this was a repack race, you've already read about it, I don't need to belabor why it is what it is, but it drew a community together, and both in competition and also in support, because if anyone had a good idea, well, it would percolate very quickly through the very small community, not many more than are in this room right now. Within 2 years of our first repack race, a whole bunch of us were riding around on hand-built bikes made for that purpose, and that was a real breakthrough, because building the bike from the ground up is a whole different thing from taking one out of the junk heap and assembling it. And almost accidentally, Gary Fisher and I got into the bicycle business, and with Tom Ritchie, and it turned out to be unbelievably influential. And I can assure you that at no point while this was happening could any of us really have thought it was going to be what it is. You know, I mean, you couldn't possibly fathom that it would take over the world. We thought we were marketing to a few hundred people, but eventually every bike company in the world copied the design that we were selling. It became the standard mountain bike, and mountain biking went crazy. Once again, as a skateboarder, but I took it up at the age of 28, you know, hanging out with kids who are 12 and weigh 60 pounds. And eventually I broke my leg skating in the pool. And I thought, wow, that was a pretty heavy price. And I kind of hung up the skateboarding and took something safe, like downhill mountain biking. But I have to say this. Now, one of the attractions for me of racing downhill is that there are a lot of sports that give you an adrenaline rush, surfing, skiing, all kinds of things. But as for me and my own particular set of skills, that was the longest I could maintain total terror, which is what the rush is. You know, it's like right on the edge of terror. But it was the longest rush that I could accomplish with my personal sports background and abilities, you know. And I can say that I will never match the feeling. And I ride the hill all the time now, but I don't go with the clock running. And with the clock running and all the guys watching, it's different. And I will never have that feeling again. I miss it, but it's hard to come by. That's all I can say about that. What made us use the rig pack course for National Race was the fact that, a couple of things. One, it's ridiculously steep. It is 14% average gradient, but there are actually a couple of places where it goes uphill, so the downhill parts are actually steeper than that. It's very, very steep hill. And it happens to arrive at the bottom end. You can ride 5 minutes, you're back in Fairfax. So after the race, you're home, you know, and so it was very conveniently located. It was terrifyingly steep. It did everything we needed to have a race. I mean, anybody who's ridden down that road will tell you that it's adequate. What's the process involved with the Fat Tire Flyer? The Fat Tire Flyer started out as a club newsletter for a club that met one time. And at that one meeting, I agreed to do the club newsletter. And I did, but there was no club. There was just a newsletter. And I made the mistake, my girlfriend and I were both producing this, and I made the mistake of putting issue 1 on the one that I produced. Well, that's a mistake, trust me. Just should have said special issue one time, you know, but when you say issue 1, what's that say? Where's issue 2? Pretty soon people are bugging me for issue 2. And of course it was a cheaply photocopied, it was nothing, not very impressive publication. And in fact I was distributing it to people who knew everything they were going to read. It's like, how much news is there? There's only 30 or 40 of them. You know everything everybody's doing, but I'm trying to write a newsletter anyway.
All the news that's fat to print.
Yes, so well the bottom line is it did get out of control. It was the only thing in print for mountain bikers for a while, and it was as badly run as the company Mountain Bikes, and eventually it failed. But it sure was fun while it wasn't failing. Poster in 1978 for the sole purpose of identifying who was putting on this race. Because I did feel, just a gut feeling, I mean there's nothing you can analyze, you know, it just gut feeling that it was really, somebody's going to notice this eventually. And I wanted to make sure my personal stamp was on it. And that was the purpose of doing posters. So my name and a date and a few other pieces of information are, you know, something you can show somebody 20 years later, and here I am doing that. But I didn't really expect to. But I did collect all the memorabilia because, why not? It was my thing. Everybody's got a scrapbook, you know, you play on a Little League team, you get all the clippings, right? Well, that was the same thing. Anything that had to do with that, most of it said something about me. So I started collecting all this stuff and became obsessive, and that's another story. I had to rent a building to keep my collection.